The British Isles has a long and well-documented geological past. Perhaps one of the most interesting recent phases of this was the last Ice Age, otherwise known as the Pleistocene epoch. Various different species of humans made their way to Britain during this period of time, leaving evidence of their activities and stone tool construction. However, there was also a time when humans seemed to have completely vanished from Britain, despite having been present here before and after. Why did they disappear, where did they go, and why did they come back? In this video, we will explore the Ipswichian interglacial, the name of the time period when humans vanished from Britain. An interglacial is a time of warmth between periods of glaciation, where ice sheets retreat but is still included under the umbrella term of the Ice Age of the Pleistocene. So join me, Emilia, as we take a look into the climate of the Ipswichian, delve into some of the incredible animals that lived at this time, and investigate the mystery of the missing humans. The Ipswichian interglacial is, in my opinion, the most fascinating period of the last Ice Age. It boasted a tantalising variety of animals never seen before and likely never to be seen again in the British Isles, and provides some of the most puzzling mysteries of the Pleistocene, which remain unsolved to this day. The Ipswichian interglacial lasted from 130,000 to 115,000 years ago, and was the last of the interglacials before the one that we are currently in. It has a variety of other names too, such as the Emian, as it's known in Europe, and the Sangamonian, as it's known in the USA. In fact, the Ipswichian used to be, and sometimes still is, called the Trafalgar Square stage. So many names, we really should just decide on one. Some of the unique animals around in Britain at the time include straight-tusked elephants, narrow-nosed rhinoceros, hippopotamuses, and predators such as spotted hyenas and lions. The Late Wolstonian glaciation, which occurred just before the Ipswichian, and the Devensian glaciation afterwards, show animal life near enough identical to one another, with a faunal assemblage including woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant deer, cave bears, and horses. The Ipswichian, however, represents an incredibly brief anomaly in the UK, which saw the inclusion of some very unique animals in an ecosystem never seen before or after in Britain's history. At this time, the British Isles were separated from mainland Europe. The glaciers from the previous glaciation had melted and retreated back to the poles. Subsequently, the water levels had risen and flooded Doggerland, the strip of land separating England from mainland Europe, therefore isolating the Isles with sea levels between 4 and 6 metres higher than today. The climate itself was nearly identical to today's, but the exact range depends on which paper you read. It is generally agreed that the summers were around 2 to 3 degrees Celsius hotter and the winters were slightly milder. The plant life of the Ipswichian has been shown to be similar to Britain in pre-Neolithic times. Much of the land was covered in dense deciduous forest, mainly consisting of birch, pine, oak, holly, hornbeam and alder. This would have created an ideal environment for the smaller animals such as woodland mice, deer, badgers, foxes, brown bears and wolves. However, the land would have been much more open and flat around the coasts, river valleys and floodplains, with plant life in this area being shrub and herb dominated vegetation. It is these regions that the largest, most unique animals in Britain would have lived, such as the straight-tusked elephant, narrow-nosed rhino, giant deer, and of course, the hippopotamus. But why is this interglacial so special? For one, there were hippopotamuses in London. The assemblage of animals found in the Ipswichian has never been seen in any interglacial beforehand and has not been repeated since. This interglacial was also extremely unique, not just for its fauna, but also for the fauna that was lacking, something we will talk more about later on. There are a few significant and well-known sites with Ipswichian age strata that have provided us with much of the information we know about the interglacial. Some of these are the Torbrian Caves of Devon, the Barrington Beds of Cambridge, and Munsley in Norfolk. And perhaps surprisingly, Trafalgar Square. Many different animal remains were found in the sediment underneath where Trafalgar Square is now, including the complete skull of a hippo. Roaming England during this time, you would have come across the usual badgers, foxes, red deer, roe deer and fallow deer. There would have also been wolves and brown bears commonly found in England until a few hundred years ago. These are all animals I'm sure you are familiar with, so we're not going to be covering them today. Instead, we will focus on the more interesting occurrences. Firstly, the hippopotamus. Yes, that's right, 120,000 years ago there were hippos in London. They are the species Hippopotamus amphibius, the very same species found in Africa today. Now, they were able to live in England at this time because of the unusually warm and wet nature of the climate, and likely migrated up through Europe as global temperatures rose. Until very recently, it was thought that hippopotamuses had only ever set foot in the UK during this Ipswichian interglacial. This means that if you found hippo bones at a certain site, that specific layer could immediately be assigned to the Ipswichian. For the most part, this is still true, but a few recent exceptions have been discovered. One of these comes from Westbury Cave in Somerset, where a hippo tooth was found that dated to 1 million years ago. This comes from the species Hippopotamus antiquus, an extinct species of hippo that on average was double the weight of the modern hippo, Hippopotamus amphibius, the species that lived in the UK during the Ipswichian. Some of the most noteworthy hippo skeletons found throughout the UK include the Honiton hippos in Devon, the Leeds hippo in Yorkshire, and perhaps the most striking visually, the Barrington bed hippos from Cambridgeshire. So this is a hippo skeleton from the Ipswichian of Cambridge. This specimen is particularly remarkable because it is mostly complete, and usually it's just isolated bones that are found, like the teeth, so this is pretty amazing. Straight-tusked elephants, the species Paleoloxodon antiquus, occupied the floodplains and river valleys. The genus Paleoloxodon was first named in 1924, and quite a few different species have been assigned to it, giving it one of the widest geographical and temporal ranges of any proboscidean, the order that elephants belong to. So we can safely say this guy was quite successful. Paleoloxodon antiquus roamed Europe and Western Asia from around 0.8 million years ago to as recently as 50,000 years ago. Like other members of its family, it was herbivorous, grazing on leaves, fruits and grasses. It reached a height of 4.5 metres at the shoulder, with males being bigger. Their tusks could grow up to 4 metres long, and they were proportionally longer limbed than their modern African relatives. Sadly, they died out in England around 120,000 years ago. Controversial studies have suggested that they persisted into the Holocene. This is not entirely agreed upon, however, but genome mapping has suggested that Paleoloxodon antiquus interbred with mammoths and Asian elephants, so in a way, their legacy still does live on into the Holocene. The narrow-nosed rhinoceros, Stephanorhinus hematochus, reached a height of about 2 metres at the shoulder. Their most notable features are the long and low skull with a high degree of forward shifting. They would have fed very similarly to the aforementioned straight-tusked elephant, being a mixed feeder, grazing on low-growing vegetation. The closest modern relative of the narrow-nosed rhino is the Sumatran rhino, the smallest living species of rhino that is now critically endangered. There was also Megaloceros giganteus. You have probably heard of the giant Irish elk, a deer that was neither an elk nor exclusively Irish, and you may have seen its cameo in The Hobbit. That might have not been a Megaloceros, actually, I don't quite know. We'll go with it. It had the largest antlers of any deer ever, spanning up to 3.5 metres across and standing as tall as 2 metres at the shoulders. Surprisingly, its closest living relative is the fallow deer, another deer species characteristic of Ipswichian Britain. And yet it is somehow only the third largest deer to have ever existed. If you want a video on big deer, let me know. Megaloceros lived in England during glacial and interglacial periods, going extinct in Britain around 11,700 years ago, at the Pleistocene-Holocene transition, but survived in Russia until around 7,000 years ago. The predators of these giant herbivorous megafauna included spotted hyenas and African lions, not their glacial cave counterparts, but the same species as those inhabiting Africa today. Now you're probably wondering, we've spent the last 10 minutes or so discussing the wild array of animals at large during the Ipswichian, but where were the humans? Well, funny you ask, there were none. As far as we know, no humans ever witnessed this unique fauna of Britain. Before we talk about why humans might have been absent from England during the Ipswichian, let's first talk about who these humans may have been, or more specifically, what species of human we should expect to find. Currently, 4 species of human are known to have occupied Britain in the Pleistocene. The first is Homo antecessor, a species described in 1997 but still remaining relatively enigmatic to this day, with the majority of bones attributed to this species belonging to juveniles. The only evidence of this species of human in the UK was a set of 50 footprints from Haysborough that were uncovered during a storm in 2013. They date to just under 1 million years old and were immediately signed to Homo antecessor, as they are currently understood to be the only species of human living in Europe at this time. It is believed Homo antecessor became extinct around 800,000 years ago, long before the Ipswichian. The next archaic Homo we will discuss is Homo heidelbergensis. Acheulean hand axes from this species have been found all over the UK, but the only remains attributed to them from the UK come from Boxgrove in Hampshire and have been dated to 500,000 years old. Homo heidelbergensis is thought to have had a gradual rather than abrupt extinction around 200,000 years ago, just before the onset of the Ipswichian, but they have been hypothesised to be the direct ancestors of the Neanderthals. Speaking of which, Neanderthals, or Homo neanderthalensis, were the third species of human to live in England. Once again, their tools are found all over the UK, but their remains have only been identified from 3 sites: 2 teeth from Boxgrove, a 300,000-year-old proto-Neanderthal cranium from Swanscombe in Kent, and multiple teeth and jawbone fragments from Pontynewydd caves in Wales, which is around 230,000 years old. Their tools are found in the UK until their extinction around 40,000 years ago, meaning they occupied Britain before and after the Ipswichian, so were definitely living in mainland Europe at the time. The final species of human that occupied the UK was us, Homo sapiens. The earliest Homo sapiens remains from the UK come from Kent's Cavern in Devon and are dated between 40,000 to 45,000 years old, so 70,000 to 65,000 years after the Ipswichian ended. This implies that, of the 4 species of humans to have ever occupied England, the only ones present in the area during the Ipswichian were the Neanderthals. The last evidence of human occupation of Britain is from the Mid-Wolstonian Interglacial, the Interglacial before the Ipswichian. Flint tools are common in Mid-Wolstonian sites, found in sites in Suffolk, Hampshire, Kent and Wales. All of these contain tools made with the Levallois technique of stone knapping, and they are found among the bones of extinct animals, showing that humans were common in Britain during this time. The Levallois technique of toolmaking was common among Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, suggesting humans were not just surviving, but apparently thriving during the Wolstonian Interglacial. After the Mid-Wolstonian Interglacial, it seems that humans disappeared from Britain. The next evidence of human activity is slightly contested. Some sites appear to show human activity soon after the Ipswichian and are dated from the very beginning of the following Devonian glacial, just when temperatures started to drop from the Ipswichian. The dating of these sites, however, isn't completely reliable, as the regions appear to show a lot of reworking and contamination from younger sediment. The oldest sites after the Ipswichian that are accurately dated and clearly show human activity are from right in the middle of the Devonian, between 60,000 and 45,000 years ago. So it's clear there's a large chunk of time in which Neanderthals are absent from Britain, but how many Ipswichian sites have been investigated to see if humans were present? A study in 2010 found that 139 sites had been identified in Britain that, at some point in time, had deposition during the Ipswichian. Of these sites, 38 of them had been confirmed to date to the Ipswichian with no contamination from younger or older material. And most importantly, none of these sites contain archaeological material of any sort. Simply put, while archaeological sites are relatively common during the last interglacial before the Ipswichian, there are currently no archaeological sites reliably assigned to the Ipswichian itself. No human remains, no tools, not even any cut marks on animal bones. So essentially, if you find hippo bones at a site, you won't find any human activity. And if you do, please bring it to a museum because yes.
Give it to us. Yeah.
Or me. Yeah, I would be okay. There are several hypotheses that attempt to explain why archaic humans were not present in the British Isles during the Ipswichian Interglacial. So let's explore 3 of the main ideas. The first hypothesis is that humans were in Britain at the time, we just haven't found any evidence of them yet. The Ipswichian lasted for 15,000 years. In geological time, that's a blip, but in terms of human history, that's quite a chunk of time. And all we currently have to show for these 15,000 years are 38 sites that are confirmed to date only to this time period. Therefore, it is regarded as entirely possible that humans were present, but in low numbers. The fact we have no human bones dating to the Ipswichian is unsurprising. We've only found the remains of 3 Neanderthals in the UK, and all of these date to times when the climate of Britain was much colder, so they would have preserved far better. The wet and warm climate of the Ipswichian is not ideal for preservation. It is not unusual for us to have found no animal bones bearing cut marks either. The large island of Java supported a seemingly continuous population of Homo erectus for well over 1 million years. And yet, of the 30,000 fossils found at the site, only 5 animal bones show clear evidence of butchery. Still, the lack of stone tools is highly unusual. Stone tools are perhaps the best evidence for human activity, since properly produced Levallois and Mousterian tools are easily identifiable, and don't decay in the same way as organic remains. Sites that yield no human or animal remains still regularly yield flint tools, sometimes in their hundreds. I think we can agree, this is unusual. Another idea is that perhaps the environment wasn't suitable for Neanderthal survival. Neanderthals are famous for their dramatic adaptations to survive in the cold, characterised by their prominent brow ridges to keep snow and rain out of their eyes, and shorter limbs to conserve heat. Neanderthals developed the best adaptations to survive in the cold of any members of the genus Homo. It has been hypothesised, in fact, that Neanderthals were simply so well adapted to surviving in the cold that they simply couldn't cope with the hot, humid conditions of Ipswichian Britain and migrated out of the area to live in the cooler regions of mainland Europe. This idea has a number of issues, however. Firstly, mainland Europe south of the UK would have been warmer during the Ipswichian, so if they couldn't cope with the temperature of the UK, they certainly wouldn't have been able to handle the warmer temperatures of France or Germany. In fact, Neanderthal presence in forested regions during the Ipswichian in France and Germany directly contradicts this theory, as it demonstrates that Neanderthals indeed would have been able to live in conditions even warmer than Britain in the Ipswichian. Also, the reconstruction of a Neanderthal with incredible adaptations to the cold applies only to Western European Neanderthals. Other Neanderthal remains, such as Teshik Tash 1 from Uzbekistan or Amud 1 from Israel, demonstrate that Neanderthals living in warmer eastern regions would have been taller, lankier, and with less prominent brow ridges. The climate of these regions, even during the glacial periods, would have been similar to the interglacials of the UK, consisting of dense forests and swamps. So these Neanderthals weren't struggling with the warmer climate. The evidence actually suggests the opposite. Amud 1 is the tallest Neanderthal ever found at a height of 5 foot 10 inches, and with a cranial capacity of up to 1,740 cubic centimetres. This Neanderthal had by far the largest brain of any human ever found in the fossil record. These features are signs of a better diet than their Western counterparts, so we have multiple examples of Neanderthals living in conditions similar to, or warmer than, the Ipswichian of Britain, and they seem to be doing even better than if they were in glacial conditions, pretty much disproving this idea. It's not like these Neanderthals were scared of the animals living in England either. That site in Germany that I mentioned earlier, Neumark Nord, gives clear evidence that Neanderthals hunted the giant straight-tusked elephants during the Ipswichian. Check out the 300 episode special of 7 Days of Science, please and thank you. And there are plenty of examples of archaic humans hunting hippos, such as a site in Ethiopia in which a hippo was hunted and killed by Homo erectus, and they even turned its femur into an Acheulean hand axe. This gives pretty clear evidence that if the ancestors of Neanderthals could hunt hippos and turn their bones into tools, Neanderthals could almost certainly do the same. Perhaps the most generally accepted hypothesis for the missing humans is that the sea level rose too quickly before the Neanderthals could migrate back to England. We mentioned earlier that Neanderthals were probably forced out of Britain during the late Wolstonian glaciation, as the climate this far north was just too cold for them, as the ice sheets expanded their coverage. From here, they crossed the Doggerland Bridge to mainland Europe, where they lived in the slightly warmer conditions. When the climate warmed up a few tens of thousands of years later during the Ipswichian, and the climate was warm enough to allow humans to migrate further north, any Neanderthals that had made their way back to Doggerland would find that the sea levels had risen so quickly that the land bridge had become completely flooded. The English Channel had reformed. This hypothesis also suggests that the same scenario happened for horses, the other animal not present in England during the Ipswichian. One problem with this idea, though, is the sheer diversity of other animals present in Britain during the Ipswichian. Hippos, lions, and spotted hyenas migrated from Africa all the way up to England during the Ipswichian, yet Neanderthals and horses, which were already living very close by in the general area, couldn't get there in time. We also know, as mentioned earlier, that Neanderthals actively hunted straight-tusked elephants, an animal fairly common in England at the time. You would think that of all the straight-tusked elephants migrating into England during the early stages of the Ipswichian, at least a few herds would have had a group of Neanderthals following behind them. It's just odd that humans and horses, two of the animals best adapted for long-distance travel, are not present in an area ideal for their lifestyle. A similar hypothesis posits that both humans and horses being absent from the UK isn't a coincidence at all. Horses were one of the animals that was most often hunted by Neanderthals. It could be that, by sheer coincidence, horses didn't cross Doggerland in time and all groups of Neanderthals were hunting them this time, so as a result also didn't cross the land bridge before it flooded. What is most likely is that a combination of several chance factors led to this inexplicable assemblage of animals, or lack of some animals. Whatever the reason is, the Ipswichian is an incredible interglacial period and provides so much to study and look at. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed our tryst through the Ipswichian interglacial, and let us know if you would like similar videos from us in the future. Hippopotamus. I want a hippopotamus for Christmas. Only a hippopotamus will do. I don't want a crocodiles or rhinoceroses. I only like hippopotamuses. No.